What's up, YouTube? Now Halloween is just around the corner, so today I'm going to show you an easy Quilt-As-You-Go Halloween table runner. The things you're going to need to make this table runner are 12 squares of fabric that measure 3 3/4 inches. You're also going to need 9 strips that measure 2.5 inches by 14 inches. Now I went ahead and I just used fat quarters for these. At my local Walmart, they had a whole bunch of Halloween prints, so I went ahead and got 12 fat quarters. And what I did was I went and cut a strip that measured 3 3/4. Then I cut out my squares from that strip. With the remaining fabric, I went ahead and cut out a 2.5 inch strip. If you don't want to get 12 different fat quarters, you can go ahead and just get 6. Then you're just going to have to cut out 2 squares and 2 strips from each fabric. You're going to need some sort of batting. Today I'm just going to use this 80% cotton, 20% polyester, because that's all I have right now. If I had more fusible fleece, I would definitely use that for this project. And this batting happens to measure 17 inches by 33 inches. You're also going to need some sort of backing. I'm going to choose this cute pumpkin print here because I have a lot of it. If you want, you can go ahead and use a fall theme or even a Thanksgiving print. And that way this table runner will be reversible. This backing here also measures 17 inches by 33 inches. You're going to need your iron and ironing board and machine with matching thread. Today I'm just going to use black. So let's get started. So the first thing that I'm going to do is go ahead and lay out my table runner. So I'm going to start with one 2.5 inch strip. Then I'm going to lay down 4 of my squares. Next, I'm going to lay down 3 strips. Just like that. Now when I lay down my strips, I do not want 2 of the same fabrics touching. So for instance, if I had this candy corn fabric right here, I wouldn't want the candy corn fabric touching that. Next, I'm going to do 4 more squares. Alright guys, welcome back. We had a power outage here, a transformer blew, so we didn't have electricity for a couple hours. So just to recap here, I have 1 strip here in the beginning, then my 4 squares, 1, 2, 3 more strips, 4 squares, 3 strips, 4 squares, and finally the last strip. I think in the beginning I said you needed 9 strips, you only need 8. But I went ahead and cut out a strip out of each fat quarter. That way if I wanted to, I could come back here and swap out a strip if I didn't like it. The next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and take these 4 strips here, and I'm just going to sew them together. So I'm going to take these first 2, lay them pretty sides touching, and with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm going to sew right down here. Just like this. Now I'm just going to take the 3rd square, lay that with pretty sides touching, and sew it down. Open that up, grab your 4th square, line it up pretty sides touching, and sew it down with that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now it should look something like this. I went ahead and gave it a press, and I pressed all my seams to the same direction. And you want to do the same thing with your other squares, and I already went ahead and did that. Now's a good time to take a picture of your table runner. It could be a little difficult to get exactly in the right place when we're sewing this together, so I like to just go ahead and take my phone and snap a picture or 2. This just happens to fit nicely on my mat here, so I'm just going to move my whole mat over to my other table over here. Next, you want to grab your backing piece, and I'm going to lay this so the pretty side is facing down. And you want to make sure there's no creases, no wrinkles, that this is nice, ironed, and flat. Next, we're going to grab our batting piece and we're going to lay it right over top. Now this piece of backing is a little longer than the measurements I told you in the beginning, but that's just fine. But I'm going to go around here and I'm going to kind of rake the batting, and I'm going to make sure that my batting covers my backing. When I have it looking good from the back here, I'm going to take the whole thing and flip it around. Now I'm going to make sure that my fabric is nice and smooth onto the batting. I'm going to flip it back around. Now at this point, you can go ahead and spray baste your batting down. That'll work just fine. Like I said, if I had any more of that fusible fleece, this would be a perfect project for that. But I do not have a piece big enough for this table runner. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and take some pins, and I'm going to stick some pins in here. And that's just going to make sure that nothing moves. Alright guys, so I have this all pinned up. I did go ahead and trim my sides to be even with my batting. Now we need to find the center of our table runner here. And to do that, you can just go ahead and fold it the hamburger way, crease it, and then fold it the long way and crease it, and that'll find our center point. But I'm just going to go ahead and measure it today. So because this is 33 inches long, my center point will be 16.5, which is right here. It's 17 inches wide, so that means 8.5 right here will be our midpoint. So now you just want to take your middle set of squares here and one of the strips that was on the right hand of your square. So now I'm just going to find the midpoint of this middle seam right here. The easiest way is just to kind of fold it in half and give it a finger press. So I know that point right there will match up with this dot. Just like that. You could go ahead and throw some pins in here. And at this point, any pins that are around here, I'm just going to take them out. Now I'm just going to take this strip here. I'm going to lay them with pretty sides together. You could go ahead and throw some pins in here too. And now I'm just going to take this over to my sewing machine, and with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm going to sew right down this seam. Next, I'm just going to open this up, and I'm going to press it open. And I'm just going to go ahead and take my iron and carefully iron that open. This is 20% polyester, so it will melt if you hit it with your hot iron, so just be careful. So now I'm going to grab the next strip that was next to the candy corn fabric. I'm going to lay that with pretty sides touching. And with that 1/4 inch seam allowance, sew down that seam. I'm just going to throw a couple pins here just to keep it secure. Now, like I said before, if you use pins to attach your batting to your backing, make sure you remove those. Alright guys, I sewed my 1/4 inch seam allowance, so now I'm just going to give this a press also. So now I'm going to grab the next strip that goes right here, and I'm going to do the same thing. Right sides together, pin and sew. So now you just want to grab your square piece, and it's going to go right here. As you can see, my strips are longer than my square pieces, and I have a bunch I can trim off here later. But I want this seam to match up with this seam as much as I can. So I'm going to grab my ruler here. I'm going to lay it right along the seam here. And then I'm going to line up one of my lines going this way on my ruler with the seam. That looks good right there. So now I'm going to match up my middle seam in my squares, which is right here, with the edge of my ruler. And put some pins. Now with that same 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm going to sew these squares down. So now you just want to fold it over and give it a press. Now our final piece on this side is one more strip. So I'm going to lay them pretty sides together and sew it on. Alright guys, so I have the final strip here on this side all sewed and pressed. And this is half of our table runner done. Now you can just go around here and trim off any loose threads or just pull them out. And we're going to turn this around. So now I'm just going to sew on my strips going this way. So I'll have 3 strips, another set of squares, and one more strip. So I'll show you what it looks like when I have this all sewed together. Alright guys, so I'm at my sewing machine here, and I decided to show you just a few of these strips and how I sew them on. Like I said, I'll be using a straight stitch. My length is a 2, and my width is at a 0. And for this, you do not have to backstitch. Alright guys, so I went ahead and I sewed on my first 3 strips, and now I'm going to sew on the square. And just like before, I lined up the center seam here with the center seam of the previous row of squares, and I'm just going to sew. Now I made sure that this was pretty flat and there was no wrinkles in the backing or batting, but it is a good idea to just go ahead and kind of smooth everything out with your hands while you sew. So I'll remove any pin and kind of smooth everything out. Now I'll go ahead and sew on the final strip and we'll trim this up. Alright guys, I have this all sewed together now. And if you want to make this longer, you can go ahead and add extra strips to this to make it as wide as you want. And if you want it really long, do a few more strips and another square set. But Mother suggested I make a smaller table topper this time. When we have our leaves in our table, if we have company, the longer table toppers look just great. But when it's just me and her at the table, this shorter one will look perfect. So now I'm just going to go ahead and trim this up. So I'm going to turn my cutting mat the long ways. I'm going to grab my ruler and I'm going to find the narrowest part. For me, it just happens to be this set of squares right here. So I'm going to line up the edge of my ruler with the bottom of that square. And then I'm going to line up one of these lines with the seam. That way I know it's nice and straight. That looks good right there. So with your rotary cutter, hack it off. So now I just turn my table runner around and I'm going to do the same thing. Now I'm just going to turn my whole mat again and cut off the sides. This time I'm going to line up a line on my ruler with one of these straight edges. I know those are straight. Now just cut it off. And do the same thing on the other side. So this finished size one will be about 24 inches long by 12.5 inches wide. Like I said, if you want a longer one, just add a few more strips or square sets. So now you just want to do our binding. So I'm going to move this off to the side for one moment. And I have 2 strips that measure 2.5 inches wide by the length of the fabric on the bolt. And 2 will get around this just fine. So the first thing that I'm going to do is go ahead and take this over to my ironing board, and I'm going to iron each strip in half, just like that. So now I'm just going to open up my binding here, and I'm going to put the peak facing up. I'm going to take my other strip here, and I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to lay it so my peak is facing down. I want the top edge of my top strip to match up with the side here, and the top edge of the bottom strip to match up right there, and I'm going to stick a pin or two. So now I'm just going to take this over to my sewing machine, and with that same straight stitch, I'm going to sew corner to corner. Now I'm just going to eyeball this, but you could go ahead and get your ruler out to make sure you're going in a straight line. And once I'm done with that, I'll go ahead and clip off this little dog ear, leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Alright, so I sewed my strips together, and now I'm just going to cut it, leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now when we open it up, we have one long strip of binding. So now you just want to grab your table runner here. I'm going to turn it to the back side. So now I'm just going to take my binding here, and I'm going to put it so the raw edges of my binding match up with the raw edges of my table runner. Just like that. And I'm going to leave a good 8 to 12 inch tail here. So I'm going to stick my pin right here. I'm going to measure over 12 inches. Which happens to be right here. And that'll let me know when to stop. So now I'm just going to take this over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew my binding on with that same 1/4 inch seam allowance and straight stitch. When I get to the corner right here, I'm going to stop about a 1/4 inch away from the end. I'm going to pivot, and I'm going to sew right off the corner, just like that, at a 45-degree angle. I'm just going to stick a pin here, just for video purposes. Now after I sewed off my corner here, I'm going to break thread. I'm going to fold my binding over so that this raw edge matches the raw edge of our binding. And then I'm going to fold this back over and line it up with the edges. You should have this funny little flap here, and that's just what you want. So I'll take you over to the sewing machine and show you how it's done. Alright guys, I'm going to start at my first pin here, leaving a good 8 inch tail. And I'm going to backstitch. And then I'm just going to sew it on. When I get about a 1/4 inch away from the end here, I'm going to stop with my needle down. I'm going to raise my presser foot and spin my project. And then I'm just going to sew right off the corner. And break thread. So now I'm just going to fold my binding back so that it's in line with the edge of my table runner. Like that, and it should form a little triangle here. And then I'm going to fold it over onto itself, just like that. And you should have this little flap here. That's exactly what you want. Now I'm just going to stick it back under my sewing machine. And starting with that edge, just keep sewing. Alright guys, so I have my binding all sewed on here, and now I just want to join these two pieces together. So to do that, I'm going to overlap this piece of binding by 2.5 inches. which is right here, and snip it off. Next, I'm going to open up my top piece of binding so that the peak is facing up. Now I'm going to open up this piece of binding and I'm going to lay it so the peak is facing down. You may have to fold your table topper up a little bit. And I'm going to join these together the exact same way I joined my pieces of binding together. So I got a couple pins here, just so nothing moves on me. Now you just want to make sure that the top edge here matches the side edge of your binding, and the top edge on this piece of binding matches the side here. Now I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine, and I'm just going to sew corner to corner. When I got this sewed down, I'm going to clip off this little dog ear, leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance. That'll give us the perfect amount of binding to finish this table runner. Alright guys, so I have it sewed together, and now you just want to clip off this little dog ear, leaving your 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now I'm just going to take this back over to my sewing machine, and with that same 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm just going to sew this opening closed. Just like that. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn this binding to the front side. So now I'm going to attach the binding to the front with a zigzag stitch. Go ahead and clip any of these threads. So what I like to do is I like to put my binding in the front just past that seam we just made. That way when we go over it with our zigzag stitch, it'll cover that seam back there too. You want to back stitch at the beginning and the end. Now when we get to the corners here, we're just going to fold this right straight off of our table runner. It should form a little triangle, just like that. And now you want to bring the other side in. And then you'll get a nice mitered corner. So what I like to do is I just go ahead and sew right up maybe a stitch or two onto that corner. I'm going to stop with my needle down, raise my presser foot, spin the project, and then just keep sewing. I'll show you what it looks like when I'm finished. Alright guys, so here is the finished Scrappy Quilt-As-You-Go Halloween table topper. And I think it turned out just great. And like I said, this finish is about 24 inches long. If you want it wider, go ahead and add a couple more strips on the edge here, and that'll make it about 32 inches wide. I think that'll be perfect on any size table. Now the front looks fantastic, but the back also looks great too. I just put this plain pumpkin on here, but this could work for Thanksgiving, just for fall, and because it has these quilted lines here, it gives it a little more interest. Now this will be the perfect thing to add a touch of cute spookiness to your table this Halloween. I hope you give this video a try. If you like this video and want to see more of my videos, go down below and hit the big red subscribe button and give this video a big thumbs up. If you have a question about this video or any of my other videos, or would just like to leave a suggestion for a future upcoming video, leave me a comment. Feel free to share this video across your social medias. And as always, thanks for watching. Have a safe and happy Halloween, and I'll see you next time.